Hi everybody, welcome here today. My name is Nell Greenwood and I'm the Director of Curriculum here at AFTRS, and I wanted to welcome you today here on behalf of the school. I also wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Bidjigal and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose land we're gathered here today, and to pay our respects to elders past and present. AFTRS really appreciates its strong ties to industry, and we are really delighted to be able to host these two talks this afternoon. It's great to see so many of our alumni on the ACTA list and on the ACTA nominations, and thrilled to see some of our current students and teachers here today. So welcome everyone. Congratulations to all the nominees and the winners. Good luck to everyone tomorrow night, and I hope you all enjoy your afternoon of wonderful talks. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Kingston Anderson. I'm the CEO of the Australian Directors Guild. I'm going to be your moderator today, and I'll actually moderate both sessions, this session and then the next session. I'll just give you a bit of a rundown of how this afternoon will work. So we've got two sessions. There'll be an interval in between, so you can go and have a cup of tea, have a chat, or whatever else, go out and come back in. But if you could keep when we call you in, you could come in rather quickly, because we've only got a short period of time for each one of these. The session is 45 minutes long. I'll try and keep some time at the end for questions, but it's quite a short session. So if you've got questions, please store them up, and we'll have someone with a microphone on the side. So if you could wait till you get a microphone. Okay, I'd like to thank our partners in this. This is a collaboration between the Australian Writers Guild, the Australian Directors Guild, the Screen Producers of Australia, and ACTA, as well as obviously AFTRS, who've provided us with this fabulous space. So it's we sort of worked together on putting this together, and we wanted to focus really on the creative process. So we really wanted to look at how these shows, these ACTA nominated shows, were put together, and from the creator's point of view, from the beginning where there may have been an idea or not. So that's the point of view we're trying to take. We're going to focus on that. So we're probably not going to talk as much about the practical side of production and things like that. We're probably just going to try and focus on the creative side. So we'll see how we go. But we're open to any questions. So I'd like to introduce our panel for the first session, which is focused on Riot, which was nominated for ACTA yesterday. Unfortunately, didn't win the ACTA award for Jeffrey, unfortunately, and as well, so which I'm very disappointed about. Or Greg, or I'm sorry, or any of them really. I'm sorry.
We won one.
They won. No, they did win one. So we had one winner. So we always thought it was a bit strange doing this session today after that one, because you had anticipation as well. So I'd like to introduce the panel briefly, and then we'll get underway. So actually, on my right here is Greg Waters, who's a writer. Greg's had an extensive career in television as both a network executive and a writer. His writing credits include Fireflies, The Alice, My Place, Dance Academy, Ready for This, Secret City, and of course Riot. Other shows he has worked on as a script editor or network executive include Double a Fist, Paper Giants, The Straits, Devil's Dust, Janet King, Anzac Girls, and Accidents Happen. So if you haven't seen any of those shows, I suggest you leave now, because clearly he's writing for television that's been going for a long time, continues to be in the middle of it. On his right is Louise Smith, who's one of the producers on Riot. Louise has produced a number of short films and executive produced film and television. Her credits include The End and Riot, and she's produced 3 feature films: Dance Academy, the movie, correct?
Yep. EP, that one.
Yep, EP, that one, The Square, and The Rage in Placid Lake. And if you've ever worked on feature films, you know they take a hell of a long time to do as opposed to television, so that's an extensive career. On my left, and if there's no, I won't say it, is the producer of Riot, Jo Werner. Jo's been producing series television for a number of years, and her credits include Scooter, Secret Agent, Weird Science, H2O, Just Add Water, The Elephant Princess, Dance Academy, Ready for This, Secret City, and of course Riot. She's also produced the feature film version of Dance Academy, which is Dance Academy, the movie. Mm-hmm. Correct. And then on my far left, the most important person on the panel.
Completely biased.
Clearly biased as well. You should have got the Writers Guild to run this. Jeffrey Walker, who directed. Jeffrey began his career as a child actor, and he's in some of the most iconic Australian children's drama before moving into directing. He has directed feature films and television drama both in Australia and the US. Some of his TV credits include Home and Away, Neighbours, Blue Heelers, Last Man Standing, Holly's Heroes, Weird Science, All Saints, City Homicide, The Elephant Princess, H2O, Just Add Water. Starting to see a connection here. Dance Academy, Wild Boys, Jack Irish, Rake, Modern Family, that little American show, Fresh Off the Boat, and many more. His feature credits includes Dance Academy, the movie, and the award-winning Ali's Wedding. He is currently directing the TV miniseries Lambs of God. Is that correct? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And on the end, I don't have a CV for this guy. He just popped in. Xavier Samuel, who's in Riot, who's probably known to you for such things as...
Riot?
Okay, that's all we need. We weren't supposed to have actors on this panel. So
Actor nominated.
Actor nominated as well. Yeah. Okay. So he's got an actor nomination. So that's good. So we want to kick off. First of all, for a start, I actually just want you to play the trailer for Riot, just to get us into the mood of the show we're talking about. So if you wouldn't mind playing the trailer.
Let's get this party started!
Oh, I'm glad you spoke. Now I can tell your mouth from your asshole.
Now we need to present an agreed position of the gay and lesbian community. Can we start with
We should
decriminalisation?
be running openly gay candidates in elections. We should be visiting more churches.
I'm not really political. Just being here with me is political.
You must have done something to antagonize them. Please don't just arrest people out of the blue.
Divorce papers came. They've subpoenaed both of us.
I'm sure the court keeps kids with their mother.
Oh, with their lesbian mother.
The police raided my surgery today.
If we go to court and we lie, we just agree it's something to be ashamed of.
Personally, I am sympathetic, but you need to demonstrate that the wider community supports change.
We should be overthrowing the government. Surely we can do both. We can have law reform and the revolution. How?
I think we should have a street party. We're going to close down Oxford Street and have a riot of colour and fun.
What? We're going to have a Mardi Gras.
We are marching side by side. Some people have fallen.
I think that deserves a round of applause. Yeah. The quality of the television drama that was nominated yesterday is incredibly high. And when I was talking to the directors, particularly Glendon Ivan, I was just saying it's incredible. And he said people around the world are starting to recognise the Australian television drama is really shooting way, way, way above its weight. And I think this is a good example of that. I want to start with you, Jo. Mm-hmm. Where did this start? Because obviously it's an event, it's a public event. But how did was it based on a book, or did someone come and whisper in your ear? What was the story? How does it, as a producer, where did this come from?
Well, it's a great success story actually, in that it was an initiative from my company to open the door to new writers that we hadn't worked with and to look for new concepts. So we did a calls for concept under a program called the Story Lab, and we had about 550 applicants. And Lou, as development executive at the time, read every one of those applications and narrowed it down to about 50.
Yeah.
And then verbally pitched each of those, and then I think we narrowed it down to about 30, and then from there, Riot, or Bent as it was called at the time, just leapt off the page. So it was created by a fabulous writer, Carrie Anderson, and the concept, she'd researched the project a lot and had come forward with Lance as the lead character and the characters around them. So whilst there was a real life event, found the characters within that the story could be told through. And then Lou and I pitched to the ABC, and it was just a 2-pager because the story was of an origin story of Mardi Gras. So we didn't feel in this instance, every development process is different, but in this instance we didn't feel like we needed a 25-page pitch document to go along with it. We were able to communicate in those 2 pages and in a verbal pitch what the story that we wanted, the angle that we wanted to take on telling this real life story. And the ABC were supportive from absolutely day one. And then Greg came and joined us, and the process really started in earnest of finding our path of what was the story that we would tell. This could have been a 10-part series of the gay rights movement in Sydney in the 70s that led to the first Mardi Gras. We originally pitched it, I think, as 2 telemovies, but the ABC were very keen to have it as one event. And the brilliant thing is that it was pitched for, it was pitched with the idea of being there for the anniversary, the 40th anniversary of Mardi Gras, and amazingly no one else was pitching for that. So ABC put us into development with the idea of a delivery date and a broadcast date in mind from day one. So whilst that put a lot of pressure on the timeline for scripting, it was amazing to know that if we got everything right, we had a guaranteed broadcast spot.
So that's really unusual. It's a two-pager. You actually went to the ABC with a 2-pager. And so you think the weight of the event really carried the day for you in terms of you had the angle and that was the one that really sold it?
And a really wonderful story in Lance. Lance died, how long ago, Lou?
2008.
And so he wasn't with us any longer, but there was so much research to draw on, and we'll talk a lot about this later on. But just having Lance as that story as the entrance point, it just gave such a personal view to this moment in history.
Right, and you read the 500 and got the 50. So what was the thing that popped out for you to get this towards that lower end? Because I imagine a lot of people are curious about how that process works.
When I read the material, I was like, how has this not been made yet? This is such an obvious event, well, particularly for Sydney-siders, it's so iconic. And I think as well, it's just was the right zeitgeist moment. Yep. And I mean, of course, we couldn't have predicted the vote that was going to be going through at the time when we were shooting, when we pitched it. But actually, the day we flew down to Melbourne to pitch it, well, Joe's in Melbourne and I flew down for the meeting with the ABC, and I read in the paper, I never read the physical paper, but in the plane they handed out, and it was like that day they had, the Sydney Morning Herald had apologised to the 78ers that they had named and put their addresses in the paper of all the people who were arrested that night. People lost their jobs, people's families disowned them, and they apologised for that. It was a tiny little apology, but it was there, and I thought, ooh, this is kind of a momentous day. So, yeah, I think it was just...
So from the pitching to the first day of production, what was the time frame?
Very quick.
Yeah, I know, I'm curious to know.
There was a lot of interest very from the very beginning, and then as always happens with any network, there's then time to actually get the contract for development. So it was sort of a pitch and then a wait and then a sprint.
Right.
So from the yes, which might have been, we were in production on Dance Academy, the movie at the time, and it was probably, we were still in pre, so it must have been June. And then we started the process of development. And then I remember, because I just had my first baby, and 2 weeks after I got out of hospital, the ABC rang and said, we want to go ahead with Riot, we need it financed in 2 weeks or it's not going to happen.
Right.
And so then went about raising the $4.5 million to make it happen in those 2 weeks. And my baby and I just stayed in bed for that time and talked on the phone.
And then it just ran
Absolutely.
Straight away.
And then pretty much all pressure was on Greg too.
Well, that sort of introduces you to the project, because there's obviously a lot of source material in terms of interviews and footage, etc. Where did you start in terms of, you've obviously got the 2-pager, but where did you start in terms of the research? And I know you did a lot of research as well, where nailing the story and what you needed.
Well, in a way, we were lucky to have the deadline because you could have researched it forever. You could easily have put 4 or 5 years of research into it.
And Carrie had done a lot of research in the early stages as well, which was hugely helpful.
Oh, this is Carrie Anderson, and she's the one who pitched the basically came with the project.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it really was, we had to be really targeted. We had to do our list of people that absolutely had to be spoken to, people who appeared, who were the real people who were going to be portrayed. We absolutely felt we had to speak to each of them, and almost without exception, some of them just were okay and just said, okay, yes, you can do it, but I don't want any involvement. But most of them were unbelievably generous, gave us photographs and old records and minutes of meetings that had been held in 1974, and they were amazing. And we were telling their lives, and they also let us, fiddle with things, have breakups after they actually happened, or keeping a couple together, across the length of the thing, because telling the story of on again, off again would have just been too hard in the time. So we just had to be really focused on what we absolutely needed, hone in on those people and get their story. And then there was a wonderful resource, which is the Pride History Group, had done oral histories. They had recorded a lot of the people who are now dead. They'd actually recorded their stories while they were alive, and so we were able to hear Lance's voice. He'd had 3 taped interviews with him, so we were able to use that as an incredible resource.
So you've actually doing the research on in terms of choosing the story. As well, was there anyone who said, no, I'm not I don't want to be seen in this at all? Was it one of those situations? I'm just curious.
There was one person who was not impressed by the whole thing happening and saying, look, I'm not going to stand in your way, but don't really want to be involved in it.
Well, we were very nervous going into it.
Oh gosh, because I think the thing is we weren't there. We're not 78ers. It's not actually our history. So what we also discovered by researching it is that within the group of the 78ers, there are different versions of this history, and trying to navigate the politics within that organisation, which was also sort of had a whole nother flurry leading up to the 40th anniversary. They kind of found their 78er voice again. And so we were kind of petrified of annoying
right up until broadcast.
A lot of them.
and we didn't research it and then write it. We were writing it and researching it, and then researching it and finding something out, and then having to revise this, and then going back.
That was the amazing thing, that from the first draft to the final draft, the stories that were unearthed through the research, and I think one of them, sort of one of the most moving parts of the script. And also the.
Jeremy.
Rape.
Jeremy and the rape.
Yeah,
oh my God.
And that was the other thing, was like we'd have a version that we had researched, and then we'd sort of track down one of the real people, and then we'd get to sit with them and hear their story. And in the case, I don't know who here has seen it, but in the case of the character of Jeremy Fisher, we picked his story because he had this, the BLF came to support him at Macquarie Uni after he'd been kicked out for basically being found out that he was gay. And it was quite significant because it was, the first time in the world a union had supported a non-member in that way. And then when we spoke to him, he shared his story, which is in the film, which is about him being raped by an old man. And it was so heartbreaking. And he was telling the story, and his partner was there, his partner of like 30 years. And he finished, and I was like, can we tell that? Like, are you okay about us sharing that? And he was like, absolutely. But then as a consequence, when you're kind of given the permission to tell that story, you have to be really careful as well.
So were there boundaries that you felt you couldn't cross over? Because it is a pretty topical story in terms of really, the focus of it is revealing people's personal lives at a very fundamental level. How much responsibility did you feel to the real people? And I want you to chime into this one, because I'd be interested to see your viewpoint in portraying a real person like that, who is fundamentally a leading character but is alive. I'm not alive anymore. No. But the point is the responsibility of the dramatists to the real people. Did you feel that way on you at all, or did you have any discussions about what you would and wouldn't do?
I think it's kind of a bizarre task to try and accurately represent someone who you never met. In the case of Jim Walker, who I played, he was Lance's partner. He died at 45, and pretty much all I could find actually was an obituary, which had talked about his work that he'd done in East Timor and his fondness for Egyptian studies and things like that. So a lot of the information was anecdotal, and so.
And in the case of Jim, we had literally one photo,
Yeah.
and it was like black and white and very hard to see.
Yeah, and so I think I found out later his partner Gordon Bain is still alive and seemed to be very kind of moved by the whole show. But yeah, it's an enormous responsibility to portray someone who lived and who did such amazing things. So I guess you just try and give a fragrance of or the spirit of their kindness and the urgency with which they acted at that time, you know.
Because we didn't have any recordings of him speaking or anything.
He died so young.
With Damon Herriman, who played Lance, he really felt the responsibility of playing this character. And Jeff, you could talk to this a lot, but in hearing Lance's recordings of his voice, Damon nailed it.
Yeah, there's a very specific cadence. And I just think it helped him find it. I think how recent this all was is the burden in many ways, because it hasn't drifted off, and it was a different. It's like it's really, they were all on set with us, all the time. We had wonderful set.
I was going to ask you about
that.
that. Did you have a lot of the people turning up?
But and I have to say that's completely the warmth and the spirit that I think Greg and Lou had shared when they go and meet everyone. They would be so nervous about how it's going to be depicted, and it could be terrible. It could be a bad TV movie, and it's just sort of trivialising what they did. But I think that you sort of made them feel so safe and comfortable, and it was such a kick, to have them come to set and, I mean, there was, like they were there when we were staging the big, riot and the whole thing, and, so it was, I think that side of it, was very special, but it was a pretty heavy burden. But I think ultimately, Damon having access to just, hours and hours of tape on Lance helped him sort of understand who he was and yes, his particular cadence.
and you guys were saying you were researching and you were bringing stuff in quite late. Was that happening when you were shooting, or did you try and lock off the script?
Wasn't so much when we were shooting
before
in
you started?
pre-production, for sure.
Definitely in pre.
But we sort of made it our kind of goal to make sure that every character that we were depicting, we had to touch base with them if they were alive, or their family if they'd passed away. And so we, as a consequence, I got to meet with Lance's family, his children, his, and they came and visited set. I was in touch with his ex-wife, who was just wonderfully supportive about the whole thing. And in fact, after she saw it, she said she cried. She just thought she was looking at Lance on the TV. Like, she just found it amazing. And one of the last people we contacted was actually Jim's partner, Gordon, who he was with when Jim died. And that was I was so worried about trying to track him down, and we literally found him when we were locking off the credits. And it was so wonderful because he was able to send us photos of Jim, and and he just wrote beautiful emails. Like, everyone wrote these beautiful emails afterwards because I think they felt so included. But I think it was because we contacted everyone. We didn't sort of put anyone in that's okay, we'll just kind of go with that sort of generalness of that character. It was very important for us to get the specifics.
Yeah, the ABC had an instance on the, I think I'm allowed to say, on a show of theirs where a real person took exception to their depiction, and they were sued. So the ABC were very nervous, and we knew that our defence would be that we were truthful and that we had contacted every person. And then beyond that, with the wider community, there was certainly nervousness about who we were saying came up with the idea, because there's so many different people have different opinions about how Mardi Gras started, and we knew from the beginning our defence would be we just had to make a really, really good show, and it had to be as truthful as we could, but have the right passion behind it, and I think that's. We had a screening with a lot of the interested parties, including the current police, New South Wales Commissioner, at the ABC before we broadcast, and so that was terrifying. But when we got the tick from the audience in the room there, that...
Because in many cases, when you do anything with people in real life, you will actually get well, in the case of the ABC, the ABC lawyers
Absolutely.
looking at this. I mean, this is a fundamental part of whenever you're doing a dramatic adaptation of anything, you actually got to think about the real people and will they sue you and what is the depiction? So you obviously got the sign off from all the legal powers that be on that.
Yeah, we sort of had a slightly made up document called we didn't get life rights from everyone, but
I was going to ask you about that because I've heard about that, life rights, this sort of thing. So what is that? What did you get? What was the thing?
What did we call it, Lou? Our lawyer sort of made up a document.
It was kind of almost like them saying, look, I understand that you're making this show and that a character that may reflect part of my life will be in it. And there were a few people that Greg combined characters on, and but one of the other things I wanted to say was that one of the things that Greg really pushed hard for, because we had found this huge group of, I mean, the 78ers it's a massive group, but that real desire to show both a male and a female perspective, because I think if you look traditionally at some of those really important LGBTQI shows like Milk or even the what's the one? When We Rise and so on, it was just about really making sure that we gave equal voice to the women, and what we found in our research was that a lot of the women felt that their stories were often pushed to the back. And so that was a really important part for us, and probably why it kind of worked well when we'd go together to meetings. In that way, don't you think?
I mean, it's a bit like the sign off is a bit like documentary. You obviously get participants in documentary to sign off, so it's a similar sort of thing. And then when you went into production, we'll get the time, we'll have some questions in a minute. If you've got the questions, get them ready. When you went into production, and you said you had people on set all the time. Okay, so what was that like in terms of, were they consulting or were they literally just observers? I'm curious about that.
I think they were fascinated that, I think they're so sort of like, they were modest to the extent that they kind of baffled that we were making this big movie about it. You know, like it was a really interesting, you know, there was a curiosity. I mean, we shot in the original building of the original camp headquarters, so even more surreal for them to sort of come and visit, you know, because they'd just been left standing. And it was amazing because Greg had written in the script that it had to be next door to a fire station. It was like, I was asking a lot, it's got to be right architect, and it's like exactly there, still exactly the same, you know, from that time. So I think they were just sort of like fascinated with it. They certainly weren't there to say, I didn't do that and this didn't happen. They were more curious and fascinated with how we were choosing to tell that story, and you know, see all the wardrobe and all the different things, I'm sure too.
And I noticed, I made a point earlier, you've worked together in some form on a few projects. Well, you two particularly, obviously, Dance Academy, but I think there's you've done as well. In terms of that sort of collaborative partnerships, whether it be film and television, are you always thinking, yes, next project I'm going to work with Jeffrey, or I'm going to get Greg? I mean, what's your
Jeff, I know, I want to lock him up. I wish. No, it's it's the wonderful thing about collaborations when you find people that you click with. Jeff and I first worked together on H2O, Just Add Water, a teenage show about mermaids, and it was my first big show as producer, and it was the most episodes you'd had at one time, wasn't it? You did 13 episodes, and then on Dance Academy. That was my first show for my production company, and Jeff came and set up the show, and then came back to do the feature, and he's just incredibly in demand, so you can't get him. So I was thrilled that he would come back for Riot, and Lou and I had worked together for a number of years in developing, and so Lou was there from absolutely first instance of the idea and all through it, and Greg and I had worked together on Dance Academy first series, and then throughout all of those series, and then you'd script produced and written on Secret City, and we're just on that.
And also I knew just from working together on Dance Academy that you were interested in political thrillers.
Yes.
And so when Matchbox was saying, we need a producer, Joe Werner would do it.
You mean you recommended her for the job?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Good work.
Because they said, but she's no. She's across this. She's developed one of her own. She's she's exactly the right.
Oh, that's funny because I always thought it was weird that someone asked me to do a political thriller after I'd done Dance Academy. It did seem.
So I've never told you that.
No, I don't know. The dances that are going on in Canberra at the moment, I reckon you're probably well skilled to do that sort of thing. So the working together, obviously that was easy in terms of that getting
was a
together.
delight.
What were the challenges for this particular show? I mean, obviously it's a period piece, so you're recreating. I mean, you've obviously got to think, what were the challenges you found the difficult part of trying to do this show in the first place?
I actually wanted to talk about just one scene. It was
absolutely,
with Xavier. It was the breakup between Lance and Jim, and in the script when we went into pre, it just wasn't working. We knew that they had to break up. We knew that we had to. We were making it up because the reality is they actually broke up about 6 months after the Mardi Gras, but we had to break them up beforehand just for the arc of the story, and we just couldn't make it work. There were just all these different things that we tried it in different places. We tried having the police come to the Jim's surgery and then Lance not know, and then we tried to have them break up in a meeting while things were going on. And so we wrote 6, maybe 10 different versions of that sequence. We still hadn't nailed it down. We'd refined it. Jeff had actually worked with Xavier and Damon, reading it and etc. And then there was a time when Jeff had the opening of Ali's wedding and was flying up to Brisbane, and I was sort of writing a version for before he took off, and then he landed, and then he said, "No, I can't do the screening finishes at this time," and I said, "Okay, I'll have a version waiting for you then," and that didn't work, and
I would say
Louise
that
was totally panicking.
I do think it
When
was
was this,
a
though?
very
When was this?
beautiful kind
Last
of
season 3.
evolving. It felt like, and maybe it is because of the history and the connection and and I love the collaboration's like the most fun part of the whole thing anyway. But I did feel like it had a sort of a looseness in a way that we were able to sort of during you were finding out new things during your research. I was working with the most amazing ensemble of actors, so they were bringing ideas and thoughts and things that would help them find their characters, and we're feeding that back into Greg, and pages would come back, and I'd sometimes, some mornings, for example, I'd start the day with these guys, have a really quick chat, go, okay, this thing, Greg, go, hold on, that's not enough, and then Lou would sort of keep that meeting going with Joe and Greg, and then I'd go out and scout, and we'd come back and we'd have new pages, and but it, it was pretty special in that way, and I mean, I think that's like, it's a little bit wild, but
Don't recommend it for
every
project.
But I sort of found it invigorating.
Yeah.
And I do think we did know that, at the end of the day, we had such a beautiful cast. We'd really been assembled, just the best, cast by Alison. So, I just knew that if there was anything that we were a bit nervous about, we would get there, and Kate, Zave, Damon.
So what? Come on, give us the end of the story. So what version did you actually choose?
Shot several.
Yeah,
shot
we
more
did.
than one,
We ended up doing. It was I think it was only 2 shots in the scene, so we could do a few different takes of it. But what it was just reducing it so that there were long versions of it, and everything got explained. And there were some things where you left kind of feeling not very satisfied and then in the end, I think it ends up being about 4 lines of dialogue or something, that ended up being reduced right down.
In the trailer, and it's in the cuts that people show.
Yeah.
It's some people's favourite scene.
And is that because you think because you were working so hard on all the aspects of it, you were able to find the essence of the scene? Would you say that?
It was these boys.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of hard to put your finger on it, and I think that I really don't know. I think for these guys, it's dealing with the whole thing is much different than playing a moment and kind of trying to communicate that truthfully. So, I think, I'm not sure exactly.
I feel like all of that process helped us in the lead up to filming, and then in the edit room, Jeff just knew exactly what he was trying to communicate, and it even refined further in the edit, of course.
It did. It was an interesting one in the edit, only because on this one we had so many actors. It was maybe 8 or 9 people talking for 3 pages sometimes in this beautiful way, and I knew that we just wouldn't have enough time to give everybody their singles, and maybe it wouldn't have been a good choice to do that even if we did have the time. But it did become a bit more a sort of a stylistic approach, was that a lot of these shots really held, and these actors, were so terrific. We'd give them, how many takes, but that was the shot of the scene, which is sort of something in television you're not afforded very often, and even in film these days, everyone wants coverage all the time, so you can do this and that. So, there were certain scenes that, really played out in a sort of more traditional cinematic sense of the shot moving around, everybody having to, block and coordinate in that way. And that came partly out of necessity, but, partly a style choice. And then and then in the edit there were certain things we could play with a lot, and it was, there's lots of, cutting and moving and everything that always happens. And then there were some that, we're really locked into the rhythm of and so on, for hopefully better as opposed to worse, but yeah.
But other things, like Jeff came in, you read the script quite early and just gave some of these, some detail notes, some big blabber notes, like saying Lance needs an aria. And so we got that great pride scene when Lance turns up again after the breakup. And that didn't come out of research, that came out of Jeff saying this character needs this.
But I think our very first meeting that we had where I came around to your place, it was, I think you were saying, I've got to find, there's more to Lance here. If he's going to carry this thing, there's got to be more there. He's got to be, because he doesn't always have a glowing review from everyone you chat to about him, it's... got around? Yeah, got around a bit, and, and he was really, like, strong and stubborn and, different things. And so I think you recognise that. But the problem, like, it was so quick. It wasn't like you could stop all the other stuff while we then went, let's go and do, let's do a Lance pass. It was like, let's do the Lance pass and everything else all at once,
and convince the actor to say yes pre the Lance pass.
And I should say this, is that Damon contributed so much to Lance. Like, and I don't mean just like, I could do it this way. He was like, I've got lines I'd love to say, and he did it so beautifully, never like totally respectfully and wonderfully, but he
was absolutely part of this process.
He was like, he had, detailed script notes, that I think helped him play it, but ultimately helped me find it and us do a better job.
He had detailed script notes before he agreed to play it.
He did. I would say contingent on him playing it, I think. But yes.
I'd like to open it up to the audience. If you've got any questions to jump in now, we'll keep chatting if you haven't. If you haven't got any questions. Yep, right up the back. If we got a microphone there and then there.
Hello. I was just wondering how you raised so much money in so short time. 2 million in 2 weeks.
Well, we were a way down the path before then in terms of ABC commitment. So the ABC were very committed, and then it was the pressure in those weeks to find the distributor. So we and then all the state and federal funding bodies. Lou crazily put in the application into Screen Australia in that short amount of time, and Screen Australia contributed a great deal to it. So
and is that outside of their meetings and stuff? Is that you just can go to them, or you still have to time it out?
The time pressure was that the ABC I'm sure you all know this, but there's certain time periods where all the application material has to be into Screen Australia for the next board meeting, and the time pressure from the ABC is it needs to be into the next Screen Australia board meeting so that we know that we've got the funding. So that was the 2 week time limit. So the big challenge for me out of that was to secure a distributor, and it's a very Australian story and celebrating in Australia. And whilst Mardi Gras is known around the world, it still is distinctively Australian, and LGBTQI was considered genre, and genre's harder as well. So that was sort of the big challenge. But NBCU came on board, Universal came on board for Australia and New Zealand, for ANZ, and then we had to wait to see that we would be successful as Screen Australia and Create New South Wales. So that was sort of the piecing together of the puzzle. And luckily, I haven't had a success in doing that in 2 weeks for any other show since. It'd be nice if it did happen.
But that was also the great thing about everyone, it was like, we have to make it now. And that wasn't a lie. Like, we had to make it before that 40th anniversary.
Yep. Someone over here, down
here. Getting the rights to people's stories. I understand how you got the rights to the protagonists. How did you get the rights to the antagonists?
So we didn't get rights from the New South Wales Police. We relied on Truth for that. Do you want to talk more about that?
The ABC lawyers came... I shouldn't...
go on. Turn the camera off.
Chatham House rules. No discussion outside this. The ABC lawyers came back and said, you've portrayed the police, the New South Wales Police in the 70s, as corrupt and violent. They may have action against you. And so I rang my friend David Marr, who'd written original stories on Mardi Gras and also on police violence, and said, the ABC lawyers have come back and said this. And, is there any books or articles I can point to that will just point out to them that the whole of everybody in the world accepts the fact that the New South Wales Police were corrupt and violent in the 70s, and the silence down the end of the phone before he sort of came back and said, and this person has a law degree?
But we had to go through, the ABC lawyers came back with, points for every scene, and we had to go back with research that pointed to that, permissions from the real people, and basically justify everything.
They've also made now, 2 formal apologies for the events of that evening. Yeah. So it is it's very much on the public record, I guess, in that way. But,
and we were working very closely with a consultant who had been doing, had over the time, like since the first Mardi Gras, had put out books and had interviewed people on milestone, like every 10 years. And so we worked really closely with him as well. So, and he was very fact-based, which was helpful too. Yeah. But there were some other things, there was a whole part of our story that takes place in the family courts, and you can't say any of that. So we had to change a whole storyline because
by particular dates you couldn't report.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We went in because the family court started in 1975, so we could tell part of this story up until that date, but then nothing further. And those sorts of things those sorts of things were tricky because they did come in once we'd had set an arc. So it's sort of unpicking things and re-finding the story. But there's always legal issues, but that's why you have good lawyers.
Any other questions coming up for me? Yep, down here.
Thanks. I've just got a question. The person that originally brought the idea to you, was that person, I can't remember her name. Sorry.
Carrie Anderson.
Yeah, was she a writer, producer, or...
a writer, uncredited at the time.
Right. So was it a case that she didn't really have the experience to become a writer on the show?
Yeah, probably. And also, it's also really a tale of the LGBTQI community, and so having the authenticity of Greg writing that was a very big plus as well. But the idea behind the call for concepts was to unearth new talent and new voices, and to have the possibility of first credits and that sort of thing. So it's a story by Carrie Anderson and written by Greg Waters.
So it had been a passion of hers.
Absolutely.
And then, right. Okay, great,
absolutely.
Thanks.
So, anyone else? No further questions on any of that?
I was just going to say to we were talking about earlier in terms of what Damon brought to it. I now think about that with every script and every scene. What does it take to get this scene to an actor that you really want to play this part, and where in this script is the scene that's going to make this actor go, okay, that's the moment I know that means I will take that. And so it's just brought to me a whole new perspective of the scenes, and I found it very useful because it all speaks to the character, and looking at it, so I sort of do a Damon pass now on everything I read.
And he does, I have to say, he does it so gracefully as well, because you could be a real, pest or come in and be a strong-armed, I don't want, but he just does it so delicately, and he really is like, it's like having another producer-director on the, on the job.
I think to be receptive to that is kind of rare, like, to kind of enter into a creative process and a collaboration as an actor is not often, available. And so I know Damon found it really satisfying. We all did, because the more you can talk about it, and the notion that it's not all set in stone, that things can evolve, and there's just so much gold that can come from working like that and being open to things.
Yeah, and I think we were probably more collaborative, than maybe you've experienced because of that cast.
Yeah.
I think, there wasn't a weak link in the chain. It didn't matter if they had 2 lines of dialogue, there was, and of course the core cast were who they were. But I think it was a lot of trust on our part as well, knowing that you're all as experienced as you are, and if you've got ideas, they're probably pretty good.
Yeah, and if it's sort of like the best idea wins, it doesn't matter where it comes from, and everyone has been thinking about it and absorbed in the world, so they have something to offer.
Kate Box was like so terrific, and she had lots of, she's a lesbian mum with a daughter, and she had like really great ideas about what that is and what the what she feels in her most vulnerable moments, and it was just like, Kate, you just do, I'll just roll. You just turn up and whatever you want to do, you do it. And
it does. It makes
and she was heaven.
Such a massive difference to feel free to go, hey, this moment, don't know why it's feeling, or I'm really excited, or I want to push it more in this direction. Just to be able to do that is phenomenal.
And just in terms of creative, another point I wanted to make, I feel like one of our big challenges, because we were telling from 72 to 78, was to not make it feel episodic, because we were making a feature film. The budget was $4.5 million, which for an Australian feature film is pretty good. So the fact that it was broadcast for the first time on television, so is technically a telemovie, we treated it like a feature. But to tell that sort of timeline in a feature and not for it to feel bitsy and episodic was a real challenge. I think we chipped away at that throughout the whole process.
That was a tricky part.
I feel like that was a huge credit to Greg to keep chipping away at that. But also through, even though it sounds like a decent budget, it was still very, very tight and very, very hard in that its period, and that sort of necessitated in a way some style choices I think that you made, Jeff, in terms of the coverage, but in terms of lots of big long shots and lots of choreography within that. But it also, because we had such a big ensemble cast, it really felt like, it didn't feel like we were shooting bits. We felt like at times you'd see a whole scene play out like a play. And I think that really contributed as well.
It was great. I mean, the whole thing was just on the speed of it all. So we hadn't rolled on a single frame, and then within 35 days we had a locked picture. That was it, all done. So it was about the most productive 35 days I've probably ever had in my life, because it was like really intense and hard. And then we locked the thing.
How many days of principal photography was that?
20.
20, yeah.
And then we had 15 days to, basically get it to the cut to a, fabulous point that everyone was happy with and so on. So it's a really intense time.
And we just come off Dance Academy with 12-week edit.
Yeah, that's right.
Proper feature film time.
Yeah, well, you're a well-oiled machine.
That's right, we just churn it out.
Whenever you think about budget or schedule or anything else, you had to factor in that we were recreating the first Mardi Gras with hundreds of extras on Oxford Street, in period, and it had to be the whole final act of the film. There was no choice. We were locked into that. That vast and complicated expense had to happen, and we had to shortchange everything else to make sure that was delivered. So that was the contract with the audience and the contract with the 78ers who'd given us their story.
We're going to have to stop there, unless there's a final question.
That was just as quick as our show.
I know, it's very short and sharp, but I'd like to thank our panellists for giving up their time.
Thank you.